Hi everyone, this is Rebecca from ChemKnits, and Mr. Rowdy and I are here today for some dyeing fun. There is this pretty cool hat cowl pattern that I want to make for Lucky this winter, and it's a fox, so I need some orange yarn. Unfortunately, this really thick wool yarn from Knit Picks called Tough Puff did not have a sufficient orange in the line, so I am going to dye the orange fiber myself. Taking a closer look at the pattern I want to knit, I decided that creating 4 skeins of this Tough Puff yarn would be sufficient. The yarn is 100% wool, so it should take up color beautifully. And I created these skeins by winding the balls of yarn around the back of my chair. There's 400 grams of fiber here and probably about 175 yards. I don't think I've ever dyed this much fiber at one time here on the ChemKnits channel. But thankfully, I now have my nice big canning pot, which is perfect for dealing with greater volumes. I filled the pot with just cool tap water about halfway. And I am going to add roughly 4, probably more like 5 tablespoons of white vinegar to the dye bath. This vinegar is the acid source, I'm going to stir it up, that will allow the food coloring based dye to bind to the 100% wool fiber. Now I'm going to prepare to pre-soak the fiber by arranging the 4 hanks of yarn around. I'm bothering to use this wire can lifter here just because it'll make it easier to lower and raise the fiber out of the dye bath. Let's see, that's a lot of fiber. Thank goodness this is a large pot. And now I'm going to lower it with a lot of help in my hands. I really don't want it to tangle, but I'm lowering it into the water. You can see I lowered the wire rack and it's all floating. So this is going to take some help from me to submerge it. But I'm pre-soaking the fiber because I want to get a fairly even color. And I'm going to allow the fiber to pre-soak for 20 to 30 minutes. But while that's happening, and I will get it completely submerged for the soaking, while that's happening, I will mix up the dye. Today I'm going to use McCormick's food coloring to dye the yarn, and I hope that I will actually have enough food coloring to get the color that I want. I'm going to be mixing my dye in 2 cups of cool water. I am doing a larger volume than normal because I want the colorway to be relatively uniform. I welcome small variations of color to give it that hand-dyed quality, but I do want to be able to add the dye a little slowly to the dye bath. Alright, I'm going to start with the red, and frequently I will do anywhere between 20 to 100 drops of food coloring per 100 grams, so I'm expecting to use a lot of food coloring to dye 4 skeins of yarn. Alright, that was about 50 drops of red. I should be wearing gloves to not stain my hands, but I'm not. Okay, so that was about 50 drops of red. Now let's do some yellow. Alright, so we're at about 50 drops of red and 50 drops of orange. And let's see. That is a very orange color. I'm going to actually add couple drops of green to maybe help give it a little more. Let's start with just 3 drops of green to give it a little more of a brownish hue. See how it, like, that deepened the orange considerably? Do another 2 drops green. But funnily enough, it also made this dye really, really dark, so it makes it a lot harder to see the color. But adding the green really is helping. So I think I am going to double this amount of dye that I've already just added and then come back. In this dye bath, we've now got about 100 drops of red food coloring, 100 drops of yellow food coloring, and about 10 drops of green food coloring. Hopefully this will give us the deep orange that we want. I am also now out of red food coloring, so if not, I will have to over dye this fiber again another day. Now that the yarn has pre-soaked and the dye bath is still cool, I am going to add the dye. And I'm even going to rinse out this glass container a bit over there, and then using my fork resubmerge all of this fiber. And I'm going to turn on the heat to medium to start heating up. I don't want to get to a rolling boil. I don't want to risk overheating and felting the fiber, but you know, we do want to get to a light simmer. The other thing I want to point out is that I am dyeing white fiber here. So this is fiber that has probably been bleached, and it won't take up dye as well as a natural cream or pale color. We're not anywhere near a simmer yet, but we are starting to see some bubbles, which means that the dye bath is heating up. There is still a lot of color left in the dye bath, obviously, because we're still not up to temp. But I am going to reduce the temperature of the stove because I do not want to risk going too far and really getting into a rolling boil. I am starting to feel nervous that I did not add enough dye, but given that I've run out of red food coloring anyway, there isn't really an option for me to add more dye. So we'll have to see what we end up with. "20 minutes in, and we are at a temperature just below a simmer, and the water is starting to clear. I will come back after a little bit to see how much more progress we've made on exhausting the dye. The water has run clear, so I'm now going to turn off the heat and allow this to come to a room temperature. So then I can comfortably handle the fiber and rinse it. To facilitate the cooling of the fiber, I've just pulled it up a bit out of the water to let this cool some more before I can rinse it. But what we can already see is that we do have some variation of color absolutely going on in there. But we will have to wait and see exactly what the final product looks like. And now it is time to wash each skein of yarn individually and carefully with dish soap until the water runs clear. See how little color is coming out in the rinse water? That's good, because that means all of the food coloring has absorbed to the yarn, and that's exactly what we want to see. after the skeins are washed, we will hang them up to dry. The color of the yarn is really, really beautiful. And there's some great variation of more red patches and more yellow patches that I think is going to be really great. Unfortunately, I wanted a more saturated color that I was not able to achieve because I ran out of red food coloring. And if I had just kept adding yellow, then, well, it would be even, the hue would be more yellow, which is not what I wanted. So I am going to over dye this yarn. I have added new water to my canning pot, plus 4 tablespoons of vinegar. And I'm now going to add my new dye mixture, which is 100 drops of yellow, 100 drops of red, and 20 drops of green McCormick food coloring. I'm shifting the order slightly because maybe this will result in a little less variation. I don't know, but it's possible that I will decide to add even more dye in a bit, in which case, once this has exhausted, in which case I will be adding that directly over the fiber. Now the orange yarn pre-soaked in the vinegar mixture, and I just removed it so that way I could add the dye. Because except for that first skein, I want to submerge things fairly quickly. There we go. There, that's nice and submerged. And the remaining vinegar water from when I removed that. And I am going to start heating the pot, and I will heat this fiber at just below a simmer until the dye exhausts. And then I will check back in with all of you. We are now done with the yarn cooking a second time, and the color that we have now is much darker. Now it is still wet, but for comparison, here is the yarn before we over dyed it, and you can see that the color is much more saturated and closer to the fox I was initially hoping to get. I am excited to see that there is still some depth and like tonal variation or pigmenty variation to the color, but in any event, I am now going to, off camera, wash the fiber, hang it up to dry, and then I will be back to show you what we ended up with in the end. It took 430 drops of dye to get this bulky, tough puff yarn to be close to the Foxy orange that I wanted. Sometimes things don't work out the way you wanted initially when you're dyeing with food coloring, so then you can always just try again. So I dyed this yarn twice because the first time I dyed it, I got this paler color, and while you might still see some of this tone within the yarn, ultimately the total color is much more saturated, and that is what I was going for. But both of them are much darker than the way the yarn was originally, which was this bright white. I am really excited to see that there are some sections that are a little more red, like over here, and even some sections that are a little more yellow. If you're confused by the breaking, don't be. Since I added green food coloring, then this mixture of orange had both blue and red food colorings in it, which, as we know, are apt to break and give you and separate on the fiber, because blue food coloring takes a lot longer time to absorb to the yarn than the red. I'm not quite sure about yellow, but maybe I'll have to do some future experiments to see how that tends to work. Anyway, thank you so much for sticking with me for this dyeing adventure. I hope that I will soon have time to knit this up And so then you can see more about that project on ChemKnits.com. I am Rebecca from ChemKnits. Happy dyeing!